Hello everyone. For this week's tutorial video, I will go over the most sophisticated spectral effects, which are also the most sophisticated audio effects, period, for audio that involves only one track. The least sophisticated of the audio effects that use multiple frequencies as inputs is the bass and treble boost, which is located by clicking Effect and then Bass and Treble. And as you can imagine, the inputs are bass amount in decibels, treble amount in decibels, and volume, where the volume is the amount of amplification of the effect after you customize the bass and treble. Where bass frequencies are commonly understood to be the frequencies between 16 and 256 Hz, and the treble frequencies being the frequencies that range from 2048 to the maximum 20,000. Note that the bass frequencies that go below 20 and down to 16 are the frequencies that you feel, like from a very loud speaker in your car, because they are still vibrating the air, but they are lower than your ear is built to handle. Here is an example recording where I apply bass and treble. By default, the bass and treble are at 0 decibels in equal balance. But if I increase the bass, you'll hear this. Here is an example recording. And if I decrease the bass so that it is lower than treble, you hear this. Here is an example recording. As you can tell, the bass and treble controls function similar to low and high pass filters, but it has much greater customizability, as it functions as both the low and high pass filter at once, whereas the low and high pass filters individually wouldn't be able to do that. And also because the low and high pass filter menus only give you a drop down for the decibel amounts. But here, you can fine tune the decibel differences between the low and high passes by changing the bass and treble sliders, where the greater that bass is greater than treble, the greater the low pass, and the greater that treble is than bass, the more pronounced the high pass is. And there's also a check mark to link the volume control to the tone controls, so that as you change the bass and treble amounts, the volume will adjust itself. Whereas if you did not link the volume would change dramatically, with a big difference in bass versus treble, especially when the bass is greater. Whereas making them link ensures that the software will make sure that they are about the same volume, regardless of how pronounced the difference is. The next tool I'd like to discuss is the graphic equalizer, which divides the frequencies of the sound selection into much more detailed and narrower fields than just bass versus treble. If you were to click Effect and then Graphic EQ, you will see a bunch of vertical sliders pop up with a number above each slider. Although it is very detailed and looks complicated, it is actually really simple once you get used to how it is organized. Because at the midpoint, all the frequencies are an equal amount, as usual. But if you slide the slider up, one frequency gets more pronounced than the others, i.e. the frequency that corresponds to the slider that goes up. And by similar logic, if the slider goes down, the frequency is more quieter and less pronounced than the others. And that's simply all there is to it. The part that may be tricky about graphic equalization, however, is remembering how the different frequencies of a sound affect its quality. But in general, the lower the frequency that you make the loudest, the deeper the sound will be. And likewise, the higher the frequency you make louder than the rest, the more bright the sound will be, like a violin. There are also options to flatten the curve so that all the frequency sliders are back in the middle, and invert the curve, which simply makes all the sliders go in the opposite direction if they are away from the center, i.e. the sliders that are up go down when you click invert and vice versa. Here's an example with the curve flattened by default. Here is an example recording. Here is an example with the 40 Hz frequency turned all the way up and all the others left in the middle. Here is an example recording. Note that it sounds slightly more punchy or bass-filled. Here's an example with the 16 kHz turned all the way up and all the others left in the middle. Here is an example recording. Notice how it sounds a little more airy, like the high-pass filter, but not as extreme. As you play around with different sliders, you will get different tones. And finally, the most complicated is the filter curve, which works similar to the graphic equalizer in the sense that it gives you all the possible frequencies. But the actual mechanism of how it works is different, in that instead of sliders, you have a graph, where you initially have a flat line, meaning that all the possible frequencies in the sound are equalized at 0 decibels. Similar to how the sliders being equal on the graphic equalizer also means that all the frequencies are equalized at 0 decibels. If you click the bar itself, all the sounds will still be in equal balance. You will just equalize them at a different decibel level as you move it up and down. However, if you click above or below the line, the software will draw a line from the point of the regular line to the point you clicked on, and then it will draw another flat line after the point you have clicked on. There's nothing really that you can't do with a graphic equalizer that you can do with the filter curve and vice versa. They both function the same way, just with different mechanisms. So you would simply use whatever you feel most comfortable with. Note that there is a flatten and invert option on the filter curve, which works just like the flatten and invert options on the graphic EQ. But the options that are unique to the filter curve is the linear frequency scale, which makes the frequencies appear by a linear amount rather than the logarithmic amount that they are typically displayed at, and a check mark to show grid lines, which is on by default. Although I may have shown you all of the one-track effects up to this point, I have not shown you all of the effects period, because there are a handful of effects that use more than one track at a time. And that will be the subject of next week's tutorial video, as well as the general concept of harmony, i.e. multiple tracks layered at the same time. Don't forget to subscribe if you found this video informative, and make sure to see other tutorial videos, and follow me on either Facebook or Twitter for more content.